Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Dr. Stephen Kavaratzis, who recently completed his PhD in management with a research focus on organizational behavior at Toronto Metropolitan University. We will discuss his research on the syndemic factors of burnout and why traditional definitions often miss the mark. Stephen, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk more about my research and learn a little bit more about you in the process.
Stephen, to start us off, we have all heard of burnout and the traditional ways it measured, like Marsh-Lack burnout inventory,
Yep.
but your work takes a different path. How does your syndemic model change the way we look at burnout compared to those traditional models?
Yeah. So what I noticed when I started to review the literature on burnout is many of the dimensions of burnout are very social aspects of work. And a lot of research on minoritized employees show that social deterioration of resources is a huge impact to stress, well-being, and quality of life in minoritized employees. So when I started to notice those factors, I was looking for theories that best captured this kind of social network or tapestry of resources and risks among employees. And I came across, through work at other colleagues, I came across a theory called Syndemics. And Syndemics essentially is a combination of the word synergy and epidemic. And it talks about how two kind of colliding risks or traits or characteristics or illnesses can kind of build one another up and synergistically create a more impactful effect on the person than if those two things were studied in isolation. And I felt that really evident and prominent in a lot of research on minority stress, but I never saw it in any stress research on employees. And I thought it was a really exciting gap to explore, and it complemented conservation of resources perspectives really well.
Mm. Stephen, building on that, why was it essential for you to look specifically at the intersection of racialized LGBTQ plus and gender diverse identities to find the gap in current research?
Yeah, I think that a lot of burnout interventions are based on research on white, straight, male employees, and what works for those groups may not necessarily be effective for a more diverse range of populations. So, because of that, there has been some research in intersectionality and burnout, but most of it is on racialized and gender diverse employees. There's very little research on LGBTQ employees. And I felt that was a very important gap because if we're not able to support the stress and well being of those employees, then are likely to lose those employees in industries, and turnover is expensive to organizations.
Mm, for sure. Stephen, you talk about self concept clarity in your research. How does having that clear sense of who I am actually help someone handle these massive systemic pressures?
Yeah. I think especially when we look at things like burnout, which is a multi-dimensional form of illness that's workplace specific, it can become very personal because it erodes your personal resources and you start to lose sense of yourself. And that's what I saw a lot in many of the qualitative interviews and much of the quantitative data as well in my research is that burnout is an extremely personal thing. And so self-concept clarity is this idea of how consistently we define and understand our own self-conceptualization and how consistently we present ourselves across circles. And because of stigma, because of a variety of different systemic pressures on minoritized employees, self concept clarity can become something that is very volatile for these employee groups. And when it's able to be built up as a positive resource, my research showed that it deteriorated burnout quite successfully.
Hmm. Stephen, there is this idea of the wellness paradox, where a company pushes yoga or meditation, but it actually makes people feel more disconnected because the workload doesn't change. Uh, what are some of the specific paradoxes you have identified between well-being and actual workplace outcomes?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up paradoxes because I actually recently just published a paper in Work and Stress on well-being paradoxes and interventions. And
Oh,
what can happen is I found just under 10% of wellness interventions actually had paradoxical effects where they may
mm,
have boosted performance but reduced well-being or vice
mm,
versa.
mm,
And I think that that's something that's a really important issue that needs more research. And
mm,
what I found is that it was contingent a lot of the time on whether there was presence of belonging or loneliness. When
mm,
loneliness was present, a lot of these risk factors tended to build up and
mm,
exasperate burnout. And then when belonging was present, it was able to kind of act as a conduit resource to build up self concept, which reduced burnout. So I
mm,
think it's this idea of the presence of resource or risk kind of caravans as we pull from conservation of resource perspectives. This idea that in order for resources to be successful, they kind of have to be able to cascade their effects so that you can get more of a holistic perspective of well-being that addresses multiple areas of an employee's life.
yeah. On that note, companies often roll out programs to make people feel part of the team, but sometimes it feels forced. Did you find that enforced wellness actually diminishes the belonging it meant to create?
Yes. So this came up a lot in my qualitative interviews, and people refer to it as conditional welcoming. It's this idea that you're welcome, but only up to the standards of this climate or this environment or context
Mm,
that we are comfortable in our organization. And when that conditional welcoming was present, it ended up forcing people to kind of
mm,
mask parts of their identity, and then it just kind of drove loneliness.
mm, mm. Stephen, I want to shift gears for a moment to look at your personal journey. With your yoga and fitness training background, you occupy a unique space between top down academic research and bottom up somatic practice. How do you personally balance these two? And are there moments where the research data and your physical practice actually disagree?
Yeah. I think that one of the most exciting things about when I started to pursue academia was that my fitness practices started to become stronger
Mm,
because I was reading a lot of research. Most of my master's research was all on wellness interventions. So I was really saturated in this world of what makes a wellness intervention work, what makes it successful, what makes it fail, and this idea of like theory informed practice really started to evolve how I taught yoga, mindfulness,
mm,
Pilates, a variety of different
mm,
physical activities. And I started to kind of inject moments of research or psychological mechanisms, training people on why they were doing what they're doing and how and why it's effective, not just for our body, but for our mind, for our sense of relatedness. So I drew theories into my classes and made them kind of a little bit of a lecture, a little bit of a workout, and
yeah.
I found that they really evolved my classes, and my classes started to get more and more popular.
Mm,
They people found they were more meaningful and were coming more consistently. So I think it really evolved my practice a lot. Where I think that I am still learning, or I find there's a little bit of a disconnect, is how you can study that effect uh, consistently and effectively while removing the researcher from the intervention. And I think that's something that's really challenging. Is
mm,
you read a lot of research where they present limitations by saying things like, "Oh, this was leading or biased because the researcher was involved in the intervention." But in order for us to be able to effectively provide interventions that are informed in research, sometimes it requires us to inject ourselves in the practice. And so I
mm,
think that's something that I still am
mm,
learning on how to do, because I'd love to
mm,
study some of the things I'm seeing
mm,
happening,
mm,
not just in
mm.
workplaces, but in spaces where people get to be physically active. How I can do that while maintaining methodological rigor is something I'm curious to continue to learn more about.
Yeah, yeah, wonderful, Stephen. I'm curious about the link between the body and the mind here. For someone facing systemic pressure, how does physical movement, that somatic awareness, play into self-concept clarity for employees who feel marginalized?
Yeah. I think the biggest two things are it improves mindfulness and awareness. So that idea of improving self regulation, your ability to take care of yourself, I think that's one really big piece. And I think the second one is meaning making. You build a deeper connection with kind of people around you. You see people moving around you despite their abilities, their limitations. You sometimes in these classes are forced to look at yourself in a mirror, and it just builds up this kind of self concept where you learn to like love all of yourself despite all of the things that you may see as perfect or imperfect. And so I think it's this ability to kind of make deeper meaning with who you are and how you move through the world. I think that's the mechanism, in my opinion, of why it works.
Wonderful. Stephen, your works look at the intersection of belonging and loneliness. Uh, can an employee belong to a corporate culture and do the job well, but still experience profound loneliness because their actual intersectional identity isn't being recognized?
Absolutely. I think that performance, again, it goes back to this idea of paradox. You can have degraded well being in one dimension where someone else has higher well being in other areas. And that could be what's sustaining the performance. So, this idea of confounding variables, not necessarily knowing what is getting at the performance. So I think that's a really important thing to consider. And when we just measure well-being in one way, we fail to capture some of these confounding variables. So I think that it's really important to get an idea of what other variables are at play. Loneliness could be very impactful for especially intersectional populations. That's what I really saw, especially with LGBTQ and race intersections and LGBTQ and gender intersections. That was the highest, where loneliness was extremely high. And individuals were seeing loneliness really degrade work. But on the flip side, many of them also still had a high self concept. So that was something that was also competing with loneliness and lowering burnout. But I think that the thing that makes self concept even more powerful is when belonging is present. What I saw is that belonging didn't have a direct effect on burnout, which was really interesting. Despite a lot of literature that has studied belonging by itself, what I found is when I brought self concept clarity in with it in serial mediation, the effects of belonging directly did not operate as a direct effect, but it operated primarily through self-concept clarity, and it was a very strong effect. So it was really interesting to see that yes, belonging does impact burnout, but it's not directly. It's through its ability to allow us to better understand who we are and how we present ourselves across multiple kind of spheres.
Yeah, I love your mediation analysis, though you explain the process. It's great, great work, Stephen. You have this fascinating term, the identity tax. Based on your research, how much psychological energy are minoritized employees spending just to keep a clear sense of who they are while navigating these professional spaces?
Yeah, what I found is that it's either really high or really low, and it's dependent on belonging. So belonging was kind of, I found this first order kind of turning point where people either entered a loss spiral or a gain spiral. And that's where I kind of brought syndemics and conservation of resources theories together and found that when people had this unconditional sense of belonging that was cultivated in their workplace, they were able to affirm their identities and then I refer to it as pollinating, where they were able to then do what was done for them for other people and kind of self-sufficiently reinforce this belonging culture at their workplace. But when that belonging was conditional, it led to this idea where people were masking, where people were feeling like they were on this tightrope, where they were balancing one identity at home with another identity at work, and the emotional taxing feeling of that led to extreme levels of burnout and overload, loneliness, feelings of suicidal ideation and self harm. A completely foiled experience of the other, where these two kind of spirals happened in complete opposing directions.
Great. Stephen, now that you have successfully completed your PhD and bridged the gap between academic insight and wellness delivery, what is next for you?
My goals for the next couple of years are to really kind of root down into some research labs and continue to thrive as a researcher. I want to really build some of the skills that I've become really passionate about in my PhD. So I'm hoping to work full time in research. I am eyeing tenure track as a possibility as well. So I'm keeping a very open and excited mind in that, and I'm also looking forward to continuing some of my research in broader contexts, looking at different intersectional identities, and continuing to measure some of the things I noticed of this idea of holistic well-being and holistic identity. And I also want to start to design wellness interventions by bridging my professional practice with my academic practices.
Wonderful. That sounds like an incredible next step, Stephen. Thank you for joining me today and sharing your research on the identity tax and resource spirals. You have left us with much better understanding of syndemic forces at play. We wish you very best in your next endeavors, Stephen.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.